Good afternoon, people. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. Been kind of odd here in Iowa. We had snowstorm yesterday. Today it's going to be 55. So imagine that. Anyway, we're going to hang out for a couple minutes. See if we can't get a few people on. Because I think what we're going to talk to today will help a lot of people tie things together. How's everybody doing? Johnny, Douglas, a lot of people, Eric, Lisa, Brian, Steve, how's everybody doing? Katrina, don't recognize you, Katrina, but welcome. Simon Muller, welcome. Wes Bolin, how you doing again? Mike, nice seeing you again. Just talk to each other on the post. Now that I hope you're familiar with my group and you understand what F.U. King Big Dick means. Fornication under the king, baby. Glad you know about that. You should get to know my buddy Jeffrey. He's in a situation now with a mortgage foreclosure. He could certainly use some of your insight as well as to how these bonds and everything work. Anthony, Eshe, Darren, how's everybody doing? We're going to talk about the Federal Reserve Bank today, the Federal Reserve Act, the Social Security account, the Department of the Treasury, the Treasury Direct Account, the birth certificate, certificate of live birth, and how it all works together. Because basically what we see in most commercial systems throughout the world today, there are very few left that operate under their own jurisdiction anymore. Most countries, nations, states throughout the world operate their banking system through a central banking system, which is on an international basis, but as a private banking system. Whereas you are yourself allowed to operate. When you think about governing powers and powers to govern yourself, you're able to operate as a bank yourself because you're responsible for your own finances. And therefore, you're responsible to hire an accountant if you don't know how to do it yourself. Okay, in that responsibility, you have a responsibility to know what accountant you are hiring. Okay? Now, what the United States of America has done as a government has hired a corporation to run their business. They've also hired, and that's done internally. They do that through internal mechanisms, through internal procedures. And on the international level, they've hired an accountant known as a Federal Reserve to do all of that. The Federal Reserve has a fund that they operate out of, which is the International Monetary Fund. This is all run through the City of London, the City of Washington, D.C., and the City of the Vatican. Okay? Those are the three operators in that trust. And they operate the IMF as an accounting service for all countries that operate under that. Okay? So when the American government hired the Federal Reserve to do its accounting for the United States Corporation, they then created the dual citizen for its internal operation to be able to carry that admiralty jurisdiction to inland states that had no naval enforcement. That's all that was internally. That's for their own protection so they can protect their states. That's why we have a federal government, because the internal states that don't have a naval operation don't have the ability to go to the coast and defend themselves. Neither do they have the ability to defend themselves internally from airstrikes unless we have a naval force that incorporates a naval force to help inland as well as across land. All has to do with jurisdiction. Okay, so now let's get to the point of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve gets its funds from the IMF, like I said, and those are Federal Reserve notes. Now, if you look at Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 8, where it states the obligations of the United States, they are listed as obligations or other securities. That itself tells us that the Federal Reserve notes that they're using, that they've implemented for their use internally, are securities. Okay? Now, through the dual citizen is the birth certificate and the certificate of live birth. The birth certificate is the United States citizen. The certificate of live birth is the state citizen. One is the U.S. Department of State, and it's clarified under Title 31 of the United States Code, Section 1321, subsection 73, where it clarifies the United States Department of State is the authority of estates of decedents and trust funds. Okay? The citizen is an estate of a decedent, your father, who is passed down to you, and the state is operating it for you through that dual citizen for your protection. The state, and through all of the fraud of the paperwork and everything that's happened, has, as a trustee of that United States citizen, through the state citizenship, they are a trustee. There's a dual trusteeship in that. And the United States is the grantor. They are the trustor. They granted the trusteeship to the state in a co-trustee operation with yourself. The separation of that trustee is, one is a debtor trustee and one is a creditor trustee. You are the creditor trustee. You have paramount interest because the United States is operating that dual citizen as the decedent estate of your father and your mother, as denoted on the birth certificate, through that co-creation of their estates. When they created an estate for you under their estates, both the maiden estate and the hereditary estate, the United States now has operation of that for your benefit. And they've proven this through what's known as the Treasury Direct Account, which is an extension of the Federal Reserve account, through the Social Security account, which is an account of the debtor trustee, and you are the authorized representative through the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Act, with the Savings to Suitors Clause, along with the Judiciary Act and the Social Security Act, all define that you are the authorized representative. The Emergency Banking Act clarifies everything as a banking holiday because they don't want you making a run on the bank and claiming all those assets. And that's the perfect clause for them to do that, to stop your idiocy with all these Treasury Direct groups, TDA account access groups and stuff. Look at Title 31 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 363.10, and it will clarify the Treasury Direct account and what it is. In there, it will tell you about the minor account, a custom account, a linked account, closing an account, and various other things, including the fact that one has to customize that minor account upon notice of age of majority. So once you become age of majority, it's already stated that you're supposed to customize that account. And when you don't step up to that responsibility, that right, as everybody claims, and this is where our public education fails, because nobody's teaching us this. Our forefathers taught everything to their children before the public education system. So that meant they had to teach their children their own banking values, their own banking skills, their own accounting skills, their own legal skills, their own lawful skills. And this is why it's so important that you guys have to do your own research on all of this so you can, in fact, see how this ties together. Because once you customize that minor account, the way I see it, and it's come out recently, that's actually a Federal Reserve account. That's a branch account of the Federal Reserve through the Federal Reserve Act, and that's why they have the Savings to Suitors Clause. This is also telling us that because it's done under the Department of Treasury through a Treasury Direct account, which is under the Uniform Commercial Code, and it states in the Uniform Commercial Code that as authorized representative, the signature, the person that's giving that signature is not liable for the person named in the instrument. Why is this? Because only the creditor trustee, only the creditor beneficiary can give a paramount qualified signature. A state trustee cannot qualify their signature with a reservation of rights because they are merely debtor trustee. They do not have rights. They cannot clarify rights as uniform throughout all jurisdictions because their rights end at privileges. So when our rights are violated, they are now acting in a corporate capacity. And under the Savings to Suitors Clause and clarified under the Clearfield Doctrine, the state has now stepped down from status of rights in their private capacity under judicial power and authority. They have now negated that and stepped down to the capacity of a mere private citizen acting in a civil manner and has thus violated somebody else's rights. They have trespassed. They have, in fact, been the one that committed the crime of using a financial instrument without the capacity to do so, to violate, to trespass somebody of superior interest in that instrument, on that instrument. Now, everything I've just spoken of is everything that you need to understand, along with Title IX of the U.S. Code, is the arbitration laws, and it deals with the international, private, and public laws. That man on the bench is supposed to be an arbitrator. He has been presumed, assumed, and implied to be a trustee. He is not. The plaintiff state of state is the trustee. He is named as the debtor trustee in the paperwork. We have to clarify this. And the way we clarify that is by explaining it, just as I said. That birth certificate is a dual citizenship. Without the birth certificate, you cannot have a certificate of live birth. Without the certificate of live birth, you cannot have a birth certificate. They come together. It's the duality of the internal mechanism of commerce within the United States federal corporation. It has to operate that way. Without it, we have no protection inland on the land, as we're claiming, man of the land. So we have to accept the jurisdiction of the sea in one way or another. And that's why it's called Admiralty Maritime / They come together. They're one and the same. Because when somebody steps down from their private capacity into a corporate capacity, we have to be able to assert our military force of arms. We have to be able to enforce our ability to respond appropriately. So I suggest everybody understand the Judiciary Act, the Federal Reserve Act with the Savings to Suitors Clause in it, and how it relates to the Banking Act, the Social Security Act, the birth certificate of live birth, the UCC, and your position as authorized representative, and how you can qualify that signature, because you are in fact the only one that will ever give a wet ink signature with a qualification of reservation of rights or like wording. And you have to do so prior to that signature. And feel free to use a signature. Feel free to use an autograph. Feel free to use a mark. That's your authority. Oh, and a buddy of mine watching here, I almost forgot to mention it. Title 12 of the United States Code 411. This is another part of the process where you can, once you've established, remember I said in the Title 31 of the Code of Federal Regulations 363.1, it clarifies the TDA account, Treasury Direct Account, and it is operated through the Treasury or the Department of the Treasury of the United States, contracted through the United States of America. Understand how that works. Okay, now the Title 12 of the United States Code negates that second side of the ledger. So once you become age of majority, that minor account isn't mentioned in there. It mentions how you claim age of majority, how you can customize that account, and then through customization you can either close that account, because it says right in there the TDA has right to close the account under certain conditions. As the authorized representative, creditor trustee, creditor beneficiary, you have those same rights, superior to those of the Treasury Direct Account, superior to the Department of the Treasury, superior to the United States, superior to the Federal Reserve, superior to the International Monetary Fund, superior to Washington, D.C., superior to London, the City of London, superior to the City of Vatican. You are superior. No other person. I don't care if you're the Pope. I don't care if you're the reigning Queen of England. I don't care if you're the President of the United States. None of them will give a qualified wet ink signature verifying anything they say in public. Let me see the qualification. They will all give a wet ink signature under capacity of a debtor trustee. Understand this. I've been talking about this qualified endorsement for a long time, and people don't even understand the difference between endorsement and endorsement. Get it down. It's spelled differently. It means something different. Jody, I've been looking at Title 12 for a long time. HJR 192, Public Law 7310 clarifies all of this if you read into it. And there has in fact been a affidavit, and it stands on the public registry. I'll have to find it in regards to HJR 192, where affiant pled to all of the facts in HJR 192 and upheld his own decision, his own judgment, and they had to follow it. That he has no recourse and no remedy within this system, period. And they had to abide by it because it's the truth. And it's all stated in, like I said, in all these different areas. And if you can understand, people, when we look at these things today, and this is a large part of the problem, people start connecting dots, okay? And this is another thing I've talked about. Everybody's got a different reality. There's a different path. And with each different reality, you can have different paths. You can use multiple paths. So when we start to learn how to connect the dots, we don't just connect them from point A to point B to point C to point D. We also realize there's a point A over here where you can start at a different place. So now you have a different dot. And it's not necessarily going to go directly to the other point B. It might have its own point B and go totally separate ways. It might have the same point C as a different point in another line as point E. Think about this stuff. You just have to learn how to put this information together. And in my recollection, my research, my concept, it all ties together once you learn all this information. And when you get up there and you start throwing this shit out, you understand that you have multiple remedies. HJR 192, Public Law 7310 can itself be used as a remedy. U.S. Code, Title 12 of the United States Code, Section 411, through that signature, as Jody Annan proves, and has been proven for, I believe, well over a decade, that there's a separation in the ledgers, and you can use that alone as your remedy. There are people out there that use the 1099 OIDs on the court bonds, and they are successful. That is a remedy. I know people that use their authorized signature as authorized representative, denoting UCC 1-308, and then never show up in court and have currently 11 citations that are unenforceable. Thank you. Proof on and for the record that UCC 1-308 alone works. There are multiple remedies. The first remedy is knowing your responsibilities, not your rights. You have not a single right until you know the responsibility of how to uphold and stand up for that right for somebody else. And you can't do that until you learn how to do it for yourself. Period. There's another one, coffee bean case, and they try to cover it up, is another remedy simply by using their words against them. Guy paid off his fines in coffee beans. It's a remedy. And all you got to do is use your head, know the facts, and understand, people. Again, I iterate. The facts that I have in my life and the way I use them is what creates my reality. My reality is not your reality. The next guy's reality is not your reality. Your reality is not the next guy's reality. The next guy's reality is not my reality. Everybody's different. And so we have to take subjectively into our information the events in our own lives accordingly. Right now, like I said, I recently mentioned to a guy in a conversation today that in my last trial, it was for I got pulled over for a traffic violation because I had private property placards on my truck. Well, they charged me with possession of marijuana, 6th offense, with subsequent charges. Right there, they screwed up the timeline. They're saying that they pulled me over for possession of marijuana and then found out that I had invalid plates. Doesn't make sense. So the truth of my story is different than yours because mine is presented as a possession of marijuana offense when in fact it's a traffic case. So you have to understand this stuff and realize when you use this stuff, when you learn this stuff, you have to be able to apply it according to your own situation. If I'd have known better back then what I know today, I'd have found out how much child support recovery unit had to do with it because they're the one that rescinded their suspension or their sanctioning is what they call it. They sent in a sanction of my licensing, hunting, fishing, driving, because I'd gotten this 6th offense possession. Now, even though I was found guilty, they still rescinded their sanctioning. Why would they do that? Because I was able to clarify I know exactly who I am. I know it much better today. And along with knowing it much better today, I'm much better able to apply it because I'm much better able to respond without having to ask questions. I've already asked them. I've asked many questions, and I'm going to keep asking questions. And I've gotten so good at asking questions that when I ask a question, they better think about what their answer is. And that's all it comes down to, is knowing the words. And that's why I say it's so important to read this stuff and understand everything. If you don't, we go right back. And my whole point of this is the Constitution. Regardless of the fact that I've not even mentioned the Constitution until this point, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, those are specifically stated in there. And if you read them correctly, they apply to our governing officials in a sense that they are not to violate them, and they are our set of rules to follow, to apply them against them when they do. The 11th on down, that's that dual citizenship we've been talking about. And when they start violating those, that's when you take them down into their civil capacity and only sue them in their civil capacity as a private citizen. When they violate the upper 10, that's when we use the admiralty jurisdiction and make a claim as a man with our person. As a civil action, we file a complaint with our person and we just stand there as the man instrumenting it. We're not going to have any benefit out of it except for the compensation for our duties during that. As a violation against our first 10 amendments rights, we have the capacity for common law compensation. We have the right to enforce criminal actions. The penalties against them for imprisonment, misrepresentation, first and foremost. They are misrepresenting that they are the creditor trustee, that they are the creditor beneficiary. They are not. And that's the misrepresentation. And this is how we clarify it. And again, like I said, you can use the Federal Reserve Act. You can use the Social Security Act. You can use all of these to point it out singularly. Or once you learn how to connect the dots, you see how it all ties from the Vatican, the City of London, Washington, D.C., as a international contract to use the IMF for their commercial systems. You have an international private and public law that says you have the right to conduct your affairs privately without any of it. So when we go to this TDA and the birth certificate and all that, if you want to operate that as a person for the United States and take care of the debt, you may do so by customizing that account from a minor account to an adult account, adding a linked account so that you can separate the powers from the 11th Amendment on down, so that you are not held liable still, so you still maintain that admiralty protection under mercantile law. Or you can close it, have the equity capital transferred to a private trust fund of your own persons. Incorporate a international business corporation through an offshore bank account, or establish it as a bank itself that can operate as a trust company, hiring outside through civil contracts, whether it be accountants, tax representatives, bonding agents, whatever. But then you are in charge of your person and not a trustee on a debtor side or a trustee on a benefit side. You assign individual trustees to individual duties. Understand this stuff, people. There are many different options. There are many different clarifications. A lot of people are fighting the child support thing. And again, that's one that can be done through grammar. Any case can be done through grammar. Put an English lit major on the stand and have them tear up every document as being babble. I can't understand this. In my logical sense, if I was to read this in an English lit major grammatical sense, none of this makes sense. How could it possibly make sense to the average American that only has a 7th grade comprehension level? It can't. How do you expect them to comprehend this and convey any kind of actual knowledge, willingness, and intent? You can't. I'm not stupid. I'm not the most intelligent guy, but I'm certainly smart enough to figure a lot of this out. And even I know the average person can't understand it. That's why I'm trying so diligently to help break it down to its simple words. Understand everything when you see things. Read dictionaries. Find out what the breakdowns are. When you see a dictionary that has a word in it and it doesn't break down any more than just that word, that's a word. When you see something that comes in different sections, look at it and find out if it's a term or a word. Find out what the prefixes are, suffixes are, adjectives, pronouns, all of that it's all important. Get yourself, like I said in a video not too long ago, a concise English handbook. Defense. Here on America, we like to spell it two different ways. D-E-F-E-N-C-E, as you see in constitutions. Some of them have changed it, and now they spell it D-E-F-E-N-S-E. Let me explain that. In the earlier constitutions, you will see it spelled D-E-F-E-N-C-E. Before America was actually established and had its own American English. They used British English. So now we have two different classes of English. What English is the court operating on? The court is operating on concise English. Awesome, brother. Awesome. Because like I've been trying to tell you, and don't ever get me wrong, and I know you appreciate this because we all have our differences. We all have, like I said, we all have our own realities. You have yours, and yours works for you. It doesn't work for me because I just dropped out of the commercial system at the moment. But at the same time, I'm learning all these different options so that when I do get back into it, I can use any system or any method. And as long as I know it well enough, I'm able to continue on that, or maybe make another connection of another dot from another method somewhere else along another line and just totally fuck them up. Well, what's your excuse for this then? You know, this ties into it directly, and it says here you can't do that. You know, so, and that's why it's important to tie this stuff together. And again, like I said, it all comes down to the English. One of the most astute points that this quote judge made in my last trial over 3 years ago was he looked at me square in the face. And I'm telling you, the effect on it is one of the most astounding effects. It went like this to me. But I belligerently stood there and said, yes, I do. When he said, do you understand English? Yes, I do. How little did I know, how little I really knew English back then. So I again say it's so important. It's the very foundation. In beginning was Word. Whose word is it? Is it their word? And if it's a word that's written down on paper, it's fiction. Period. Why don't you tell me that face to face? Why don't you say it word for word on there so I can comprehend it? Because when you start conveying words verbally and transcribing them to a paper where they say something differently, there is a difference. And that's in the definitions. So when you're using definitions and you see these words that you've never seen in a dictionary before as a word, and this goes right to the thing about noun. You know, what is a noun? Let me help point this out to you. A noun is a person, place, or thing. Now, if a noun is a person, place, or thing, and a person is different than a place, and a place is different than a thing, then that noun is merely just a descriptor. It is not the person, it is not the place, and it is not the thing. It is a descriptor of the thing, place, or person. Think about that. You are not a noun. If anything, you are a verb. Constantly moving. Pure energy. So think about this stuff. English, Carrie, never, you could, and this is something I tell people all the time. People, and this is one of those things where, Jody Ann, you mentioned it earlier. I'm glad to see that I finally got you looking at. I've looked at 12 for USC 411 before, and I know it. I understand it. I comprehend it. I know how you use it. But that doesn't mean I use it. I also know, I don't know the Black's Law Dictionary. There's many editions, but I know I reference them, and it's a good thing to reference. When you find them using that stuff, reference it, and then reference your definition. Make a clarification. When you see them use motor vehicle, ask them for a clarification. Which definition of motor vehicle are you using? Ask them to point out their source, and then give them your source of what an automobile is. Because an automobile comes from an automobile manufacturer. and they sell it through an automobile dealership who hires automobile salesmen. And your intent was to buy an automobile as described. The one thing they do is they make out a manufacturer's certificate of origin that defines it as a motor vehicle, saying that they have intent to use it as a motor vehicle. Well, you can't show intent of use if you're selling it to somebody else to use it. All goods are defined by their use. Period. Put any automobile manufacturer on the stand and ask them if they are under an international contract for the sale or under a contract for the sale of contract on the international sale of goods, CISG, contract on the international sale of goods. See if they have a contract on the international sale of goods. If they say yes, then ask them if they are selling automobiles or motor vehicles. Pure and simple. If they're defining it anything else than a good, they caught themselves up in a catch-22. They cannot define it any more than a good. And then when they sell it, they transfer rights to the buyer. Period. Plain and simple. That's how it works. They can't deny it. Your registration of an automobile, they claim that you're required to register it. When you go to the county treasurer to register it, ask her for her authority to requisition your automobile. Because under most state laws, you will see that it is up to the county treasurer, upon requisitioning property, the state provides a license plate and a registration sticker. But nowhere will they define a requirement to register. Nowhere. Period. That's where you have to defeat him on this driver's license. Ask the county treasurer where he or she gets their authority to requisition your automobile without authority. Show the authority that they are required to requisition your automobile. And then under the Title 26 of the United States Code, Section 7701, subsection H, where the IRS has authority to enforce a motor vehicle operator lease through any jurisdiction for any taxation purposes, if it's not being used commercially. Period. So anyway, think about this stuff and understand that you can use any source you want for your information, but it's up to you to take responsibility to know how to apply it. That includes the information I put out. All I'm doing is reiterating information that I'm finding and explaining to you how I apply it myself to my own situation, or it can be applied according to my interpretation. Things like the Colorado 9. They went down there. They tried to heavily enforce a common law grand jury. There's a fellow that just passed away this last week, Terry. I can't remember his last name. Brian Parker knows him well. He was a very big advocate in the common law grand jury because he was put on a civil grand jury to proceed in some civil matters in a case, 1992, I think it was. And he found out that the state attorney was acting in criminal manner. And so therefore he convened a common law grand jury and passed down two true bill presentments trying to indict him on a couple different charges. And when he did so, they turned around and motioned to remove those or object to those bills, and they succeeded, and then turned around and charged him with criminal acts in a civil matter by bringing those charges, saying that it was criminal to bring criminal charges against somebody in a civil matter. Basically is what they did. And that in itself is, again, another crime. And they got away with it, and he passed away this last week. And what I want to point out to you in this is that when we try to profess this common law grand jury, you can't go in there like Terry did and know the common law grand jury process, become the foreman, and assert that common law grand jury with 11 other people that don't know how to stand up behind you. When it comes to the common law grand jury, we have to understand we've got to start educating ourselves on that part. And that's why I mentioned the Constitution. That's where our power lies, is the common. What we have in common spiritually. And when it comes to the common thing, we have a right to be able to stand up for our responsibilities in the right capacity. And that's where people are getting it all mixed up. That's why I say, you are not going into that court knowing you're the trustee, goddammit. But point out exactly which trustee you are. And who the other trustee is in fact. And who that motherfucker sitting on the bench is in fact. Because in your capacity, he is now an arbitrator under the United States Code, Title IX. We are now in arbitration. Somebody has brought a false claim against my person in the wrong capacity. And it's clarified in the documents. I'll bring an English lit major in here and tell you who fills what capacities. According to your own documentation. And so when it comes to this information, we really got to know how to be that common law grand jury foreman himself. We have to know all the keys and everything, ins and outs. We have to know how to stand up as a militia. John and I are going to hopefully talk tonight about the 11th Amendment in regards to the Constitution and the separation of powers and stuff. And when we're talking about that, we're going to be talking about the 1st, 2nd, 9th, and 10th Amendments as well. Hopefully we'll do that tonight. But that's where it's at. You got to learn this stuff. And the most important document you can learn is that Constitution. You got to know both sides of the track in order to be able to defend your side of the tracks. You have to know admiralty law to be able to defend yourself on the land, being landlocked. You have to know how they're operating. Well, they're operating in your defense if you look at it in the right aspect. And the right aspect is you've got to educate yourself so you can take the responsibility of responding appropriately. In other words, being able to respond. If you don't know it, then you're going to sit there and the only way you can respond is ask them questions. That is still an ability to respond if you're asking the right questions. But to go in there and ask questions about the 1099 OID or the taxes or anything that exist beyond what your actual capacity is first, without clarifying that first, then you're assessing or you're addressing the wrong issue. It's like when you go in there, they tell you that you can question jurisdiction at any time. Well, the issue of jurisdiction itself is dependent upon the standing of the parties at hand. So we need to address the standing first. And again, I've spoke on this before. You cannot go to point 2 without first addressing 1. It's all mathematics. I explained in a previous video about the hearing. If you look, if you look at the ear, get a look online and look at the structure of the ear and look at the cochlea. The cochlea in the ear has got a certain shape, and if you look at the shape, you'll see it looks just like a Fibonacci curve, which is mathematics. 3, 6, 9, all of that. You'll get into that if you want. But it's all about the numerical mathematics in the Fibonacci curve and how things in life just have a certain way of working out. And that cochlea, the way it works is it's got a bunch of fibers that stand up. And if you look at it, it's like a bunch of, if you look at a wheat field, you see a bunch of, and they wave back and forth like this with the wind. As you speak, you create vibrations and they will wave, and your brain picks up that information in waves and transfers it mathematically. And whether you think about that in a binary code or a actual mathematical sense of 1s and 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s and on ups, or in the what they call the hearing ranges, where you have different tones and things like that. People can hear very well when they're young if that's in good health. As they get older and they don't stand up so well anymore, they don't wave in the wind so well. And so what happens, your brain isn't picking up so much information. And when it quits picking up information, it quits remembering. That's why I tell people, I urge you, even while you're in public education for you young kids, for you parents of young kids, pass this along. Educate yourself above and beyond that. When you graduate high school or you get your GED, don't stop. You don't have to go to another community college or a big university or anything. But whatever you do, don't stop learning. Don't stop listening. Don't stop seeing. Don't stop growing. Your hair is an extension. You can take in so much more information by just quitting it all. Giving up all the convenience. It was so convenient at one point in my life when I was running my own business to keep this all nice and shaved, keep my face all nice and clean. It was convenient because in another perspective, being involved in that commercial system and my need to bring in that commerce, I knew that was a tool that I was able to use to convey my commercial message. Today I'm not conveying a commercial message. I'm conveying one of truth. This is who I am. And if you think I'm some backwoods hillbilly, go ahead. I can prove I'm a backwoods hillbilly. I go barefoot. And I don't have any problem with it. I can tell you a lot of the different plants and everything out there. I can make you some good old homemade moonshine. And we can use it as moonshine, or we can use it as fuel starter, fire starter. We can use it as fuel in a motor. We can use it as incense. We can use it as medication. Because what I've made is a good. Understand this stuff and learn how to define things yourself. In the beginning was Word. Whose Word? Who's defining it? And it's important to learn their words. It's important to learn the Federal Reserve Act, the Savings to Suitors Clause in there, the Clearfield Doctrine, how it operates, the Social Security Act, how it ties the dual citizenship together with the birth certificate of live birth, and that account is tied to the Treasury Direct account, which is tied to the Federal Reserve banks, and you are actually, in fact, an authorized representative of a branch account known as a Federal Reserve Bank. You are, in fact, a banking representative. But as that living banking representative, directly related to the decedent of the estate that is being operated, you are the creditor trustee. You are the creditor beneficiary. because you are directly related to the decedent, known as the trustor of the estate. Period. And it says so in their paperwork. Do a quitclaim. Anybody that knows about quitclaims and land patents and titles and deeds and stuff, you'll know that one's funny. Anyway, I'm glad you guys listened in. Let me see here. Lawful rebellion, rank and title. Rank and title, let me talk about that. Your admiralty military jurisdiction. This is what I'm talking about when we talk about bringing that law in land, because your naval jurisdiction is your highest military jurisdiction, because it's able to carry land jurisdiction across the waters and invade a foreign jurisdiction. Okay, so that's your toughest, highest, superior military rank. Okay, when it comes to being landlocked inland and not having access to that, that's the importance of your force of arms. That's the importance of your Second Amendment, your ability to hold arms. Because you don't have, when the government wants to talk about this, well, what do you need an AR-15 for? Well, you need an AR-15 when that Navy force comes in and takes a hold of your naval banks, your water banks, and start moving inland. You're not able to stay there with tanks and stuff like that with them. So you're going to have to be able to defend inland yourself. Okay? Now, if they think that they can support our borders with their military from the rest of the world when the rest of the world gets fed up and hungry, and start preying on the predator, as I've spoke before. Japan, perfect example. They knew Japan was going to invade. They didn't say anything. They let them invade that border and destroy millions of American lives as it passes on generation to generation of people that were lost and couldn't provide more heirs to their lineage. And then turn around and provided concentration camps for people that were already here, known as Americans, simply because they had a heretical lineage to Japan itself. That's why we need the Second Amendment. And that's why we need to understand nobody can abridge that in any manner. Bump stocks? Fuck you. I know a lot of people that make their own weapons. And instead of calling them gun, they call them Big Charlie, Dirty Harry, Big Larry, Huge Hugo, Double Dick. So think about this stuff and remember who's defining what, and you got to understand, because if you don't, then you need clarification. And I assure you 99% of the shit out there you don't understand because you haven't looked at the words. I see a lot of people, they ask questions that are just, think about it. Copy and paste the same question you just asked me and put it into your search engine. Now, when that search engine pops up, don't look at the first one alone. Sure, look at it, read it, see if it's what you're looking for, but remember it, so that when you look at the second one, you can compare it, and you can look at the third one and you can compare it, and then once you've voiced your concern through a question and compared the different information, you can now discern for yourself what it means to yourself and what it might mean to someone else. And this is all very important. I urge people to start looking at things very intently. And when you see things that you think are words like defendant, break it down. Defendant. Look them all up. And you see that the word D is not in there. Look it up in a concise English handbook and see that D is a prefix and what it means as a prefix. Then look up the word fend. Then look up the word ant. You'll see ant in there as a word itself. But again, look up the ANT in a concise English handbook for suffix and see what it means as a suffix added on to the word fend. And when you start learning this stuff, you recognize the deceit immediately. Receipt, deceit, who is in seat. What does seat mean? Well, how are you spelling it? Well, how come you can spell it this way, but you can't spell it this way and it doesn't come up? So then you use etymology. Put in deceit into your search engine and then follow it up with the word etymology. etymology. And you'll see several sources of etymology. Look them up, read them, find out what the different things mean. Somebody asked earlier about conch, and everybody thinks the word conch, C-O-N-C-H, means a conch shell. Conch shell. What's a conch shell? A lot of people recognize a conch shell from the beach. They don't recognize Conch, Florida. Conch Key, Florida. It's a little place down there in Florida. And then when you start researching that, you see that there's a Conch Key or Conch, Florida micronation. You see that conch is an instrument. You can use that shell as an instrument. You see that conch is an architectural structure. You see the different meanings of that one word. So now you can see how it applies to you and how it applies to others. And this is the importance of looking things up for yourself. They posted this question, what is a conch? Look it up. Look it up. And discern for yourself. Because if you ask me, that's the way I'm going to respond. I'm going to say, take your pick. I'm going to give you all kinds of definitions. Take your pick. So think about this stuff and understand that you have to discern for yourself. Anyway, that's enough for me today. I'm over a half-hour limit. Like I said, I'm going to hopefully do another one tonight on the 11th Amendment specifically with the separation of powers. And like I said, I'm sure we're going to be talking about the 1st, 2nd, 9th, and 10th as well, briefly, and how it works with that 11th Amendment. So hopefully we'll be doing that tonight. You guys will be listening in. In the meantime, if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be doing this. God bless. I love y'all. Have a great day.